Welcome to the Cowboy Experience. I'm Eric Sims. I'm your host. Today, I'm happy enough to be here with Stephen, who is with Scratch Brew, right?
Yeah,
Scratch Brew. I was going to say Scratch Brewery, but it's not. It's a coffee brew. Over here, and we're in the Texas Hill Country, right outside of Austin, in a little area. That's Jonestown, Texas, technically, I think. And we're excited to have him on the show today, talk a little bit about himself and his business and what he's got going on here. And from our previous conversations, I know you're a native Austinite.
Yeah.
And so you born and raised here?
Born and raised in Austin, yeah.
And so you grew up in the area.
Yep.
And what was that like growing up in Austin? Because a lot of people, everybody we talk to is always like, I moved to Austin at age blah, blah, blah. So, you've seen it change quite a bit.
I don't know, growing up in Austin in the, I guess in the 80s, when there wasn't a lot of businesses, a lot of, none of the corporate was here. Mm-hmm. So it was more that, like, small town, big town feel. You're like a small town, but you had more of the city feel. But it was fun. A lot of the quirky businesses downtown, a lot of the things that us as teenagers could just go and do and just walk around downtown and hang out, living off of 45th Street, being close to Lake Austin and that kind of thing. So it was neat. It's interesting to watch it grow and get bigger. And I guess that's kind of leads into being out here in Jonestown now. Is as you get older, you kind of move from that big city where Austin became and kind of move out here. But I think a lot of it, as far as business is concerned, a lot of the culture that we had in Austin, as far as the quirkiness of some of the businesses and just kind of that family feel, is kind of what we've translated over into what we're trying to do now. So it's really cool.
Well, this area out here in like the Jonestown area, 20 years ago was not.
It was nothing.
Nobody was out here, and so it's cool to see how much it's developed. And it's great you've put your business out here.
Yeah, we used to come out here. This was the country. So it was like, this was like the far drive. It was an hour outside of town because there was no highways. And so you're getting out here and people wouldn't come out here, unless you were retired or whatnot. So it's kind of neat because we used to come out here to go to the lake when we were in high school, and now we live out here. So.
So now you live out in what we call God's country, right?
Exactly.
And I used to joke with my wife before we moved out this way. It was like, I used to call it God's country. She's like, why do you always call it that? And I was like, well, you'll see when you get to see it. So it's so growing up here, I'm sure you've seen an enormous amount of change. And I always joked that it was like, there's two time periods of Austin. There's BMM and post BMM, which is before Matthew McConaughey and then after Matthew McConaughey.
Right.
And so it's transitioned quite a bit, to your point. And now with these other communities, it used to not really have enough volume to have a company in, or do business in.
Right.
You're seeing a lot of great businesses like yours pop up. So you own this culinary business that's also a coffee business.
Right.
But this is not your first venture into this world.
No.
So you may want to share a little bit with us about how'd you get into the culinary side of things?
So being born and raised in Austin, and that whole the food scene and whatnot. I think once I got through into high school is when I started thinking about food and kind of moving around. I traveled to Europe when I graduated, did a little backpack trip through there, and but I really got into the food scene in about 2000 when my dad gave me an ultimatum of like, you need to find something to do.
Yeah.
And I had already started, the Food Network had come around in that time, like 2000, and so a lot of the chefs would just do, it wasn't like commercialized like it is now. It was more like, like Immeld and those guys they were cooking.
Yeah.
And they were giving you recipes and you go and you cook. So I started taking and writing those recipes down and started working with it. And it kind of fueled my attention to not have to sit at a desk.
Yeah.
I like to be moving and active, and that put me into going to culinary school in Austin.
Cool.
So I went in 2000. I went to a small culinary academy in Austin, and it was small, about 12 kids in the class, and it was 2 teachers, both of them with catering experience, which was really cool.
Yeah.
And it was still in Austin. It was small, so just to your point, it was right down the street from the house. It was, 5 minutes down the road, and we really got being a small school, a lot of one-on-one creativity.
Yeah.
And that's where I actually learned the catering side of this business.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I actually fell in love with, was catering.
Yeah.
So that
Cool.
kind of led into where I started out.
And so you started your first business, was it down in Austin?
It was in Austin proper. Yeah, we were right off of Mopac in 2222. Like,
Okay.
basically in the heart. I had worked at a restaurant on the road before at Balcones for my whole high school, and then we ended up acquiring a restaurant in 2003. That we took it and we converted it into private dining. So it was really kind of a neat.
Yeah.
Something different. We took a restaurant and the family helped get the concept together, and we basically turned it from a catering company that I was working at my parents' house to catering in private, and remodeled everything. And I was 23 at the time and had no clue what I had.
Yeah, that's like a lot of us with that age.
yeah,
We don't realize how great things are until we get later in life. We're like, oh my God, that came so easy.
I know, it's like that was really easy. But the cool thing about it was a huge creative outlet for what we were doing, and I actually had teachers that were helping me with the project too. They were coming in and helping me kind of design the menus and stuff. And we ran that, and it was private for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going into the culinary and restaurant type of business, what was from the outside coming in, what was the first thing that you learned that was probably a shock? Like you were like, I wasn't expecting this to be this big of a part of the business or this different or something like that. Was there anything that kind of jumped out at you when you first got in?
Unexpected, just odd things that could happen at any moment. I mean, you're playing with food and you're doing food, and there's a time stamp on a lot of the things that you do, and a lot of it was just the whole timing of everything.
Yeah.
And making sure, especially with catering, it's all around time.
Yeah.
You have a set time you're going to drop things off, and you have this many dishes to do, so you got to make sure that all of it lines up, so by the time you get there, it's ready to go. And when I started, it was really interesting because when I started the catering business, there was an actual wedding venue out here, off of Old Burnett Road.
Okay.
Where you guys live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, there was nothing out here. And a friend of mine was like, you need to talk to this guy. He started a wedding venue. It's on the North Shore. There's no houses. It was just this one house.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. It was on the lake. And they're like, you get the shot to do this. I'd never done anything like that, and like extensive. And I just came out of school, and here you go.
Right.
And that was probably the biggest learning curve, or learning just kind of like in your face, here, do something. And I was driving food from Austin an hour out here.
Oh, wow. That's a big...
Without a catering vehicle, and it was just, jam-packed in my little Azuzi rodeo.
Yeah.
And I'd set it all up and put it out and let people have at it. And that was kind of where I got the motivation and the drive to continue with that. It just kind of spirals off of each other, just because catering's like that. You do an event, it's kind of like you get the reward, and then you go and you do the next event.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably common in a lot of businesses is that most people don't, and even when you're getting into the business, there's all this unanticipated or unawareness that you have around certain parts of it, like with food. And I've never owned a restaurant, but I've had buddies that do. And I'm always intrigued with the science behind not just the preparation of the food, because that in and of itself is huge. But to your point of like the art of purchasing the food and making sure that's timed right, the art of like preparing the food and having multiple dishes or things like that are coming out at the same time, or it's a really chaotic and involved business outside of you're not just cooking a steak or whatever, right? Like there's a lot to it.
There's a lot more that goes into like the whole business side of it, especially as like, I guess, a chef owner, and looking at it that way. You come in from the kitchen world and you go into like operating and owning a business and kind of taking all those elements of it. There's a lot more that has to be done to take your focus off of the actual food. And then two is just like making sure that what you produce lines up with how you can actually succeed or make money in the business. Because you could be great at it and you still be playing catch up. So but the catering world was fun. It was really fun. I think the other unexpected was the amount of fun I actually had doing it. Because you pull friends in, you have people coming in, influences. We actually in that business had a beer and wine license
Okay.
as well. So we did private events where we'd get the winemakers to come to our spot, and they'd set like 20 bottles of wine on the table at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And then I would write menus based on the taste of each one of them. And then we'd set the dinners up. And that was really fun.
Yeah.
Then we would promote it to the city. And we were in the heart of Austin. So we were working on Austin Business Journal.
Yep.
And you're talking about like Austin being what it was back then. Like you could do that. It was this small, like you put everything in a paper,
Yeah.
you send it out and you send
and
mailers
people
out
saw
and
it,
people
yeah.
saw it, and then they come in and they hire you for these jobs at corporate. But the amount of partying that was done was insane.
That's well, I think that's, again, like I said, I've known some guys that have been in that world, and that was everybody I've talked to that's a long timer in that world has said that's the challenge when you're young in that business is how do I not overly engage with that piece of the business. And it's unfortunately most people aren't able to withstand all that because it's like working a nightclub. It's a nightlife. It's a nightlife business a lot of times.
It's constantly, and it feels like you want to constantly go. You feel like it's never ending. Like once it's done, you still have something else to do. And it's almost like there's sometimes no completion to the project or anything. I mean, and so I don't know, maybe you're constantly trying to finalize something.
Yeah.
But at that point too, it's kind of, you start attaching certain things to your creativity or your work or how you perform. And from an outside perspective, everything looks good.
Yeah.
But from an internal perspective, you're wrestling with, your own issues with that. So that was a big piece of the first business was, trying to deal with the family influence and then the alcohol and customer influence and then the employee influence and where do you fit in that?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think that's the business part, right? Like it's like,
part.
you come in and you have this art and skill.
Yeah.
And that's where your passion and love is, but there's all these other parts of the business you have to deal with, right? And then that's all new. And there's no book, that's like, okay, here's what you do. You have to kind of figure it all out on your own. And to your point with a lot of us, some people, attach things to how they deal with it or even succeed with it that may or may not be optimal, right? Long term. They may work in the moment, but long term they may be detrimental to you or your business.
Yeah.
And so I think in the restaurant industry, there's a lot of that you got to figure out a sustainable lifestyle.
You do.
And really any business, right? You hear this from like CEOs of large corporations are like, hey, I had a heart attack at age 40.
Yeah.
Why? Well, I was working 9 million hours a week. I never came home. I never saw my family. I was stressed out all the time. So it's very similar in those senses. So obviously, you didn't implode completely. You're here.
Right.
So coming out of that, what got you here to doing this business in the Hill Country? I mean, other than Austin grew.
Yeah.
And there's still that undercurrent. We always find this. We were talking about this the other day. There's still that undercurrent you find of like they're like the real Austinites that are still around. Like they it's like it's a Austin inside Austin.
Kind of float around.
Well, we were saying like I think there's an Austin inside Austin, right? Like, and then there's still like because you can tell the difference.
There is still some heart too.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
City is.
But moving out here, it's beautiful. What how'd you get out here? What made you decide to pick this and make that kind of evolution in your company?
So I made a big decision in 2000, and this is part of the whole business and what I am like. From when I was like 19, 20, saying, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a little shop, small, where you can do food and have community come in, it was always in my head. I just didn't know what that looked like, from a full-scale catering company where you're doing 200, 300 people with the whole, everything, 2009 basically is when everything shifted. And the drink actually put me in the hospital. Okay. Which got me where I look at it, this is my faith story. What God did for me was kind of put me in my place. Yeah. He said, you're going to stop all of it and refigure out what you want to do. Yeah. So he put me in the hospital for 7 days and then went into rehab for, my stint there and learned a whole lot. Came out, lost the whole catering business, all of it. Dad was like, what are you going to do now? I don't know. the counselors out there are saying you're not going to do food ever again because you associate that with alcohol.
Right.
And I said, well, that's all I know.
Right.
That's what I've done, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're not going to do that. Well, I just didn't take the no as an answer. And so I put everything I had into what God wanted for me. And that was into personal training and fitness. So I actually went in and got a personal training and fitness certificate and started training clients. And I attached the food element to that. And so I actually took what I had knowledge of with catering and got into personal training. And I would take a client, so we would like work together, and then I'd attach the meal plan to it.
Gotcha.
And I would take the same things that I was doing. I lightened all my food up.
Right.
Learned more about like different ingredients and healthier ingredients and what alternatives there were. And then I'd make a meal plan for people. And that got me into really kind of focusing in on their well-being.
Yeah.
Took a lot of focus off of me.
Yeah.
And what I could do for them. And we would just train in gyms and they would pick up their meals like 6, 8, 10 packs.
Yeah.
And see their results and then go on to the next. And that flowed for 12 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you did that for a while.
I did it for a while. It was basically, I look at it this way, it's kind of like a vagabond. Just kind of, I had my own personal business.
Yeah.
But I had worked for other companies inside of that.
Yeah.
Like North and Daily Juice, and was doing those businesses while at the same time working outside of it in my own food realm.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what would work as something that what would bring me to this point.
Yeah.
And in that time period, it was moving further and further away from the heart of Austin, outside the city.
Right. Okay.
Which was just only reason is just because I was tired of that fast-paced. I wasn't doing that anymore.
Right.
I wasn't going downtown. I wasn't going to clubs. I wasn't going out. I liked the slower, slowing it down.
Yeah.
And Austin kept moving out. So
Yeah.
Basically 4 years ago, from like this is like tying it all in, but from all the personal chef clients that I had, all the food that I was doing for them, all the personal training I was doing, one client stood out and he took me in and I started doing direct food just for him.
Okay.
And training him. And he's the one who actually got me into the truck business.
Gotcha. So you started the truck.
So that
great.
leads into the truck. So
Yeah, so that's awesome. Thanks for sharing all that, because that's some pretty personal stuff.
it's kind of a mouthful, but
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I think, it's great. I always like hearing the stories behind stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, because it's, there always is one, and
Right.
it ties back into your passion and who you are as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things that really stood out to me is that, and we talk about this, about the Texas part of this show, and I'm not saying people don't do this elsewhere, but one of the things in Texas with business, I think, is there's a lot of personally owned companies.
Yeah.
And they normally start off of like, I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah.
Kind of mentality. Like, this is what I like. It's needed. I don't need to go elsewhere to do it. I'm going to do it myself. And I hear a lot of that in your story when it comes to, hey, you're never going to be able to do food again. You're like, no, I just got to figure out a new way to do it. Which one I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go do it.
Right.
And so I think that's great. And you're being able to take the things you've learned in your own recovery and walk and faith and infuse those into your food, into your business.
Yeah.
So you going back to the truck piece, did good with the truck, and then now we're sitting here in this cool coffee shop or culinary shop and coffee shop. Talk to me a little bit about what migrated from and I know you said it was originally part of your dream was to have a space.
Yeah. I look at it like God moves you into different positions based on your maturity and what you're able to take with that, right?
Right.
And I think what I'm started to learn is like letting go of, like we were talking about, like letting go of a lot of the need to be on the spotlight.
Yeah.
And more or less just about like, I really just want to cook food that people will enjoy and feed people with that.
Yeah.
And that's how the truck came about. It was kind of a conversation with the investor who said, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Because you can't just train me forever. And I said, I don't know. I've thought about a food truck since 2017. And then I put together a business plan with a friend of mine based on just what I thought would happen if I kept the truck in Austin.
Yeah.
And and he helped put the money into it, and I built the truck, and we came up with the marketing behind it and everything like that, and then we ended up moving out to Lago, just because for our family and for where we were in life, we felt it was just a good move.
Yeah.
And ended up not going back into Austin with the truck, and we just started working it there in Lago. And that was the first time I've ever not, it was actually the first time I've been doing like quick service.
Yeah.
Where, you're working window service and you're cooking to order, and everything up until that point I had been doing cater.
Yeah.
So you prep it all, you get it all ready, you know exactly how many people you're cooking for, you know exactly the quality of each one of the dishes, and you present it to the customer and you get instant feedback,
Right. Yeah.
And for the first time, it was kind of like, it was a brand new transition for me.
Yeah.
Fish out of water.
Yeah.
Not understanding any of it for the most part. I mean, never driven a truck before. And it was a great learning. Like, it was just, you put your head down and you just start going.
Yeah.
And I think after the first year and a half was when my wife and I started going, we're not young anymore.
Yeah.
And this is really hard.
Yeah.
Because
it's really hard.
It's just,
yeah, it's hard work.
I mean, if I was 24 or 25 and I was running that truck and it's fine. But when you get into like 120 degrees and you're pumping food out and you're doing all that, it's kind of like, is this sustainable?
Yeah. But to your point, it's extremely fast paced.
It is.
It's boom, boom, boom. You've got to be quick.
It is. And that's, I mean, honestly, the way that I got to this cafe, which is like what I said earlier was like the whole vision or the dream, was kind of by accident. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, I think that's how things happen a lot of times, is you're not really looking for it.
Yeah.
And I had told a lot of people, I had been looking for something, and I knew that I wanted to have a brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And I had been looking for opportunity like that was a little bit bigger than what I probably could chew off.
Yeah.
Like, I need an investor who can put this much money in.
Right.
Versus, is there something there that we can just get in and start working in?
Yeah.
And I had another buddy that was like, this place is available. I can get you in there. And it happened within a month. It happened within a month. And my wife and I didn't even know what it was going to look like.
Yeah.
We came from a truck that was doing gourmet street food.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it looks great. Like, you guys, it's a real cool setup.
Yeah, it's a good setup.
It's got that kind of hill country posh vibe, like, it's good.
Well, and that's the thing about, I mean, I guess you can go back to being local too.
Yeah.
And like, even local Texas and the surrounding areas, is we would go and pick out what we liked in certain areas and places.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of what this became.
Yeah. And that's what's, you've got some local artists that have their stuff up. You got local poetry books. Like, so it's kind of a real expression of the community, around here, which is neat.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we were talking before the show, so it's that I wanted to get, talk to you a little bit more about here, is you have a really unique business plan with some of your staff.
Yeah.
And what you do there. So like, you've taken some of your, again, I think I said this while ago, you've taken your person, your love, and your faith, and you've said, hey, look, I really want this business to be not about me, but about what God wants me to do. And in that, I'll have a lot of cool experiences, get to meet a lot of cool people, which is about what I love. Yeah. But I'm just not making myself the focal point of it. And so you've done some cool stuff with the people you have working here. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Over the last 3 years, I started putting students into the positions to help operate the business. And it started small. It was just like, one kid here and like putting them in that position. And then it was great because that kid that I would put in there, then they would tell their friend. But they started becoming selective with who they wanted to pick. It's like, I have a really good person for you, but I'll pick them. So it ended up being the local high school, which then transferred in because we work with the local church. Yeah. And when we frequent and we go to and learned a lot, and like met a lot of people in that community, and a lot of the youth group is awesome and really strong there. Yep. And so that kind of became our employment pool.
Yeah.
And kind of by default, because one kid, like I said, one kid would come in and I'd start putting them somewhere, and then they'd say, I have someone that can do this, and I'd put them in that position. And what ended up happening was I get into the homeschool community, and that's been a blessing. It
Yeah.
really has. I mean, it's just neat because they're out in the community and out doing things in the community along with their schoolwork. So this kind of ties in with that.
Yeah.
And it's been a really neat business to have almost fully student run.
Yeah.
You know, except for me running around here trying to figure out how to get them all in the right places. But it really is fun.
Yeah,
And I think
that's cool.
A big thing that we've done with the business is you start somewhere and you say this, like my food is this way, right?
Yep.
Like catering food's different than the truck food. You think you have a plan and you have this action plan that you're going to do, and it all of a sudden it like changes.
Yeah.
And the cafe actually started adding on the coffee and the baked goods, which weren't even a part of it. And it's really interesting to watch that take place.
That's cool.
So,
well, I think that's neat. When I came in the first few times to do that, I told you I kind of put two and two together because I was talking to some of the kids that were working here, and I was like, that's a really neat aspect of the business that you're really building back into the community because you're teaching them life and job skills,
right?
That maybe they wouldn't get elsewhere because we've all talked about this personally, is that the schools are only teaching certain things, and that's fine. It's not their role to teach some things, but the skills they're able to learn in here and dealing with people and dealing with stuff, and also maybe finding a passion of their own, which is cool.
I mean, that's if someone likes doing a certain thing, and especially in the culinary world, I don't see as many people now taking into that, like wanting to like go into the culinary world and really make it part of their profession, just as part of like, I'm going to cook for a living.
Yeah.
And maybe that does spark something where they're really interested and can do something like that, because I honestly think like my vision is I've always wanted things, and that goes back to why we changed the name from the Culinary EXP to the Scratch Brew Cafe. And really what it was for is to show like everything we're doing is from scratch. Yeah. Even from the handpick employees to the baked goods, the customer coming in and having a one-on-one experience with them, and actually getting what their feedback is so that we can create that for them. Yeah. And then expanding on that so that we're doing whole, fresh ingredient food and connecting and tying in all the elements that you would with a community and faith-based business. That's awesome. It's really neat to kind of.
Well, that ties me into kind of the next piece of our conversation, which we really hone in a lot of times on customer experience, right? And employee experience or user experience, whatever kind of business you're in. And so I want to chat a little bit about that. One of the things that we've always kind of joked about is everybody's in a different industry, but everybody that's got a business is really in the customer experience business, right? And so I know you have a philosophy or approach that you've that you have here, that you want to create an experience for people. Yeah. What is that? Like, what does that look like to you?
It's a deep question, isn't it? Because you like, when I opened the catering company, we put it like the tag is like culinary experience. Yeah. Right. And I think what it was wanting to. I grew up in an Italian family. This is all the family comes to the house, and grandma's in the kitchen, right? And everybody, it's just cooking all day long. Yeah. And my grandfather, we go to Thanksgiving, and there was like 2 Thanksgivings, an Italian one and a traditional. And so it was like having this gathering and people coming together. And I think as I took on this this food world, it was watching what you can produce, from what you grab at the store and the ingredients you get, and putting those flavors together, and not just the food, but even the overall experience of what you're like, the setting that you're in, and what you're offering to them, and how you can communicate with them what you're trying to do. That's where I think what I've always looked at trying to do for people is bringing, when they walk in, they walk away going, well, that was totally different. You know, even if it's a personal touch, it might not be cookie cutter every time.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I always said like the catering, it was like the same person could order that menu that the last person had,
Yeah.
and most of those dishes would be tweaked slightly some way.
Yeah.
And it would be different. And I've kind of always done that with my food.
Yeah.
And the experience that people have, it's like you create, like, there's a dish and that's great. And then it could be tweaked a little bit this way or that way. And each time someone's going to get a different experience of it, which is really fun. So really I always looked at it as like, what would I want if I went into a place?
Yeah.
And how would I want to feel and be treated?
Yeah.
And what would I enjoy about it?
Yeah. Well, I think, those are the powerful questions that business owners should be asking, right? Is how would I want to be treated?
Yeah.
Right? It's like the old kind of golden rule piece, right? Like, hey, listen, like if I walked in somewhere, what do I want to feel like when I have a certain expectation when I walk in? If I'm going into a restaurant or a coffee shop or something like that, like I'm expecting something. But I think, me being I walked in here one day as a customer, I met you. I was pleasantly surprised because I think your approach and what you walk away with it's different, right? Like and we've touched on a lot of them today. One of them I don't know that we've chimed in real heavily on was like I was blown away at the culinary experience, right? Because I walked in, I'm like, oh, they've got some baked goods. It's a coffee shop, and it's a culinary thing. But everybody's used to Starbucks or whatever it is, right? And I walk in, and you ordered, and you brought up my food. Yeah. And the interaction when I came in, the people were smiling, people were interacting, and yes, it's Texas, and you get a lot more of that friendliness anyway. But there was a lot of genuineness in that interaction from everybody here. And then the culinary experience when I got it, I was like, oh wow, this is like fine dining in
a coffee shop.
In a coffee shop, like it was like a totally different deal. I mean, I remember text my wife immediately, and I'm like, "Have you eaten up here yet?" Yeah. And she's like, "That's the place I was telling you about. Ding Dong or whatever." So, I think that's great because that's the thing. And then when people walk away, I'm assuming your goal is for them to have an experience like mine is, which was, hey, have you because I'll tell people all the time now, like I bumped in, like, hey, get some coffee. Any coffee shops around here? Is there anywhere to eat? Whatever it is, like, hey, have you tried this place down the street? It's a breath of fresh air, right? Yeah. Like it's not the typical thing you're expecting around here, and there's a whole experience when you come in. You've tied in your faith into here too. I noticed that as soon as I walked in, not in an obnoxious Bible thumper or whatever it is type of way, but there are things in here that let you know who you guys are and what you're about and what you believe in, and then hearing your story more of how that's changed. So that's really, really cool. Yeah. If there was a takeaway you wanted people to have, like something they would say about you in a sentence or two, what would that be? Like if somebody you could say like I hope everybody walks there and they say.
But I mean, you basically summed it up with when you had your first experience here. It's just you walk away and you tell the next person, like, have you gone there? Yeah. Because it's not what you think it is. Yeah. And that's kind of a fun thing is when people don't expect something. Yeah. Like it's a pleasant surprise. You look at it and there's so many businesses that are operated where there's a vision and an idea of so that what they have, but there's either no execution. Yeah. Or not ability to execute it, or there's just no passion behind it, right? There's a lot of places where you have the thought process in this like grand idea of wanting to own a restaurant, and it's huge, and then you get it and you let someone else put a stamp on it, getting some food in from another company and then frozen food and all, and you create the restaurant. Yeah. And it's great. Whatever. I mean, it can produce food and it can turn out food and it can turn out a profit. Yeah. Because it's consistent and it's over and over again. And you could come there and you could get the same thing and it tastes the exact same. Or my way, like basically my philosophy on things, which takes a lot longer monetarily to see it, but personally is like being able to connect with the customer is what like at the end of the day if you go and you tell your wife, and the next person goes and tells their friend, and they come in and they have like, man, you're right, that was awesome. Like, they treated me right, they gave me something new, and I'll go back because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
That makes the end of the day for me is just like, I did what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And
That's great. So I was reading an article, I guess it was a week or two ago.
Yeah.
And so the guy that used to be the CEO for Starbucks came out and made a huge post on LinkedIn, and it made the national news because Starbucks is not getting a return on investment like they were.
Right.
And his big thing was, it's not the product, it's not this. They've gotten away from some core competencies, but his big thing was they've lost the customer experience that got them to be where they were, which was, if you think about when you used to go in those places, it was the experience.
Right.
It wasn't the coffee. Like the coffee is good,
Right.
But it was, hey, I got treated a certain way.
Right.
I got a personal attention. You put my name on the cup. Like they did some things that were different.
Yeah.
And they've gotten away from that. And I think that's the trick with business. But I think that's the key ingredient that people want with that experience is that personal touch.
Right.
And so you've been able to capture that really well here.
Working on it.
Yeah. No, I think
it's always a work.
Yeah.
It's always a work, but it is something that I look at it this way. You get, like, you can get it, like, get the whole experience. You can get the cafe, you get it all. And there's so many other things that can come out of that.
Yeah.
With the employment, with the people that work for you, the types of foods that you do, working with, like, we work with a local coffee vendor in Lago, which is neat because part of the reason we decided on the Scratch Brew idea was because we were going to use a local coffee vendor.
Yeah.
And then, so we used Green Ape. They're in Lago Vista. They have farms in Guatemala. It's family owned. And looking at that from this perspective and growth is working with smaller local businesses.
Yeah.
And the ones that can actually provide that same element of what we do here for food.
Yeah.
And you really do get a whole rounded experience.
Yeah, that's cool.
Adding if you can find the farms to go along with it, and the ranches and that kind of thing. And then you kind of have your own sustainability inside of a food world that's usually corporate.
Yeah.
And I think that's really...
it's great. It's refreshing. It's like you said, it's a pleasant surprise. Like, that may be your catchphrase, right?
It's a pleasant...
In a sea of blah, we're a pleasant surprise.
It could be like going away from culinary experience to a pleasant surprise, which is really funny because we thought about, like, when we had the culinary EXP truck, right?
Yeah.
At EXP, everybody for the last 2 years, they've called me an Expo or an Express.
Oh.
And it says it so much that I've just been like, whatever you want to call it. It's like, and I never thought about that would be the case. So when we got to the cafe, it was like, well, why don't we make something where it's just like kind of universal, And what we do scratch food, and we have scratch coffee, and and so, but I like that. Take the culinary experience out, and pleasant surprise is great.
A pleasant, what are you going to say? It's a pleasant surprise. In the hill country, it's a pleasant surprise.
In the hill country,
pleasant surprise. So that's the experience piece.
Yeah.
Like, so you got your story, which is fantastic. So last couple things. One is, what's next, right? Like, what's the next big leap for you? Like, what do you want to do next with this?
Really, it's to get to ground of the roots, right? What is this place? I don't think you can ever get something fully sustainable because there's always updates to it. But having a cafe that's actually functioning and operating on the days that we're here and producing and bringing in a good amount of customers.
Okay.
I think there's a vision for something like this is to go into different small towns and to basically plug into an existing business that maybe isn't working well or the people want out for various reasons, and to put the Scratch Brew Cafe like brand into it, create another food element if they're not doing it, and be able to match what we're doing, which is small plates, fresh ingredients, simple ingredients, and a really, not an extravagant menu, but it's elegant.
It's good.
What you think of is like, it's a $10 plate, but when you get it, it looks $20, right?
Yeah.
And those are big things for people because it doesn't doesn't exclude anybody.
Yeah, it's affordable, but
right.
to your point, it's really high quality.
So that's big. And then working with the local community, probably working with the churches and the students to staff those, and actually building a brand built around education and even food education.
Yeah.
Because, in this world, like you're so fast and everything's so fast, and you go and you get the fast food. And I've done, 12 years in the fitness world. And it's like, what are you going to do when you can't cook for yourself? That was a big piece for me with teaching people. I could give them meals all the time. Mm-hmm. They'd get their 10 meals a week for 2 months. They'd lose 30 pounds or whatever it was their goal was.
Right.
Something happens. I'm done with the meal packet. I can't afford it right now. And I see them about 6 months later, and they're back to the same weight. Yeah. And so what I ended up doing in that was a teaching element to that, where I would give them the meals, but then we'd set up consultations where I would be like, you're going to come to the house, or I'll go to your house and we'll cook together. Yeah. And I'll build a plan out, but you're going to learn how to roast and bake. And so
teach a man to fish.
That's it. And I think that's been a big piece of what I've always wanted to do. Yeah. Because it gives them the opportunity to do it when we're not doing it.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that ties back in with what you were talking about with the kids. Yeah. With what you're wanting to do there and what you're able to do. And then the multiple location thing allows you to spread that net even further, which makes a real impact on the community. Yeah. Allows you to expand your vision of what you're doing. Yeah. So that's awesome. So I think that's a great plan. It's a great plan. I know of 2 places already that I could tell you to look at. Right. One's in Marble Falls and one's down here in Austin.
Maybe that's where to go.
To go look at expanding the the footprint and do some different stuff, because there are existing places that I think are ready for someone to come in and put that, give them a pleasant surprise. So a fun fact, right? Yeah. Like, so a fun thing. And because, especially in a lot of these areas in Texas, we just get a lot of there's a lot of celebrities that live around here. Right. There's a lot of big names that live in Texas, especially now. Like, even more and more people are moving here. It's pretty obvious. Like, you get on social media and see stuff. Right. So, and then over the years, there's just been a lot of people that come through these areas or live in these areas. So I ask every guest give me a famous story or the most famous person you've interacted with or cooked for or whatever it may be. So who's your story?
So when we were in the catering world, we had a lot of opportunity to work with various people just because it was private. So one of the big ones was Lucy Baines Johnson. Okay. Lyndon B. Johnson's the daughter. Okay. And so we got to do her event, and it was downtown in the new high rises, and that was fun. It was insane. We took all the food up 30 flights, of the top penthouse floor. Yeah. And taking your shoes off to go in there to cook and cater, and it's all don't go in this room because it's all white and that kind of thing, and be on your best behavior. But that was probably one of the main ones versus just your typical wine dinners with people from California that would come out and do those, and get to experience that. So LBJ's daughter. Wow, which is really
a big family in this area.
Big family in this area.
Yeah, Lake LBJ,
Lake LBJ. So, but yeah, I mean, that's probably my biggest at this point.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a good one.
It's always interesting to hear who people get to interact with,
exactly,
or have inspired their business in some weird way or something like that. Sure. It's not just Willie Nelson. There's other people that come through.
There are other people. Yeah. And your typical just movie stars and whatnot. It's more who's in the community, and some of those people that are more grounded in their roots in Texas, right? Yeah. She wouldn't think that they're here.
Yeah,
you said earlier.
They're here.
They're here, and they're kind of planted in. And it's funny because my wife and I both grew up in Austin, and then you meet most people, and they're like, "Oh wow, you're originally here."
Yeah. So
it's been good.
Cool. Well, we wish you the best of luck with everything.
Very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
And we hope you've enjoyed the show. If you've liked it, or even if you haven't, subscribe, like, and follow us on all our social media. We'd love to have you, share that with your friends and things like that, and give us some feedback on maybe different types of businesses or people you'd like to see us have on the show. Last thing is, how do people find you? How do they locate you to come experience your culinary excellence?
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So right now we are on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the two main platforms. You'll find our menus on Facebook at Scratch Brew Cafe and also on Instagram. And then you can still check out the food truck website. It doesn't really give you much, but except for what we did on the food truck, but that's culinaryexp.com.
Yeah.
And other than that, we're going to be updating people as we go through on those two platforms.
Gotcha.
As far as the new website and what we have coming out. So
awesome.
Word of mouth is big for us,
And if you're up in the Texas Hill Country, swing by and grab some good food and some coffee or whatever else.
I guess you could also say the big platform for us is Yelp and Google.
Yeah.
So if you want to find us there. So
awesome.
It's good.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank
and
you.
Hey, tune in next time. We'll see you next time on the Cowboy Experience.